We're going to continue the sikha that we started off a few days ago regarding the form, how we will fulfill the mitzvah of knowing Hashem in the most complete and highest form when Moshiach comes very, very soon. We even called the Bahaktim, we're up to page Reish Tzadik Aleph, Sichid Beis, Reish Tzadik Aleph. We even called the Bahaktim, Ayudua, Shaykeder, the mitzvah, Seidias Hashem, Hulei Leidiya, Shahu Yizbarich Nimtza. The Mikavan Shekol, Ayeder, the mitzvah, Zu, Shaykharak Lachari, Ayidiya, Shiashalaka, Mitzvah, Mitzvah, Hare Ayidiya, Zu, Guf, Loitochan Lever, Hashem Mitzvah. It's known, like mentioned in last Shir, that the mitzvah to know of Hashem, the mitzvah of Yidiyas Hashem, cannot be to just know that Hashem exists. Because what does a mitzvah mean? The whole meaning of a mitzvah means that there is a commander that is commanding to you to do something. And therefore you're listening to him, which means you believe already that a commander exists. If you don't believe a commander exists, there can't be a mitzvah to believe in the commander. Just like there can't be a king that's going to force you and say, accept me as your king. And one of the laws is to accept me as a king. Well, why should I fulfill your law to accept you as a king? If you believe that there's a king already, you already know that there's a king, so he doesn't need to tell you, and he is your king, and you're going to listen to him. He doesn't need to give you a commandment to accept him as your king. So too, there can't be a mitzvah to know that Hashem exists, because you already know that Hashem exists. How do we know that you already know that Hashem exists? Because this itself, that there's a mitzvah, means there's a command, and you already believe in Hashem. So obviously, this mitzvah to know that about Hashem needs to be something much deeper than that, like we're going to say in a minute. But this is the words of the Abar Benel that says this clearly. Beloshin Abar Benel, kasher naniach emunas mitzius hakel mitzvah, kvar naniach emunas mitzius hakel kidemes lemunas mitzius hakel. If we're going to say that the mitzvah to know Hashem is to know that Hashem exists, that means we already know that Hashem exists. Before this mitzvah to say that you need to know Hashem exists. If there's a mitzvah, commander of the mitzvah cannot be to know that Hashem exists. Because you already know that Hashem exists. He's the one that's commanding you to fulfill this mitzvah. So obviously it's much deeper. שהאלוקה ברוך הוא שכבר ידענו שהוא נמצא מציאוסי היא היצר ראשון והיצר שלם אשר בכל המציאות כי הוא אינו צריך במציאוסי לזולוסי כל מה שזולוסי צריך במציאוסי אליו וכו'. So the Abar Benel explains, so what is this first mitzvah? To know that Hashem exists. Obviously it does not mean to know that just Hashem exists, rather the Hashem that we already know that he exists. What is he commanding us? Not to know that he exists, because we know that already. Rather, he's commanding us to know that this Hashem is the greatest. And he's the first creation and the most complete creation in the whole existence. He does not need to come up to anything else, but everything else in the reality needs to come up to him. תזהו מה שכתב הרמב"ם, שהמצווה לידה היא לא רק שיש אלוקה בכלל כי אם שיש שם מצוי ראשון וממציא כל נמצא. So what does the Rambam say? What does the Rambam mean by saying that there's a mitzvah to know that Hashem exists? It does not mean that you need to know that Hashem exists in general. Rather, to know that the Hashem that we already know that exists, that he's the most complete existence. He's the first creation. He's the first thing that exists. And the Rambam continues, and like the Rambam continues and says, all the creations in the whole universe, they were not created from anything else but from Hashem himself. This is all included in the mitzvah to know that Hashem exists. This mitzvah to know that Hashem exists means to know how great Hashem is, but not in this itself that Hashem exists. That we need to know that everything in the universe, its whole power and energy only comes from Hashem himself. Gimel. והנה יש לומר שידיעת מציאות יסברך שלפני הציווי שכבר ידענו שהוא נמצא מכיוון שהיא הסיבה לידיעה שמציאות היא היסר שלום וכולו שלהקים דמצווה ידיעה זו היא מסובב מאמונה בהלכה מצב המצווה היא ניילס יסר מהידיעה שמציאות היא היסר שלום וכולו. And the Rebbe explains, because what gives us the understanding to know that Hashem is so great? We're saying over here that there's two things. First of all, there's this, that a Yid knows that Hashem exists even before a mitzvah, any mitzvahs. Then, because I already believe in Hashem exists, so now I can have a mitzvah. And the mitzvah is to know that Hashem exists. What does that mean? Like the Barbanel explains, to know that the Hashem, that I already know that He exists, He's the most greatest being and superpower, and He creates the whole world and everything gets their energy from Hashem, to know how great Hashem is. The question is, what is greater? What type of understanding and knowledge in Hashem is greater? The understanding that you know just this itself, that Hashem exists, that comes before the mitzvah to know how great Hashem is, or the mitzvah itself, the fulfillment of the mitzvah of knowing how awesome Hashem is, to know how awesome Hashem is, that's the fulfillment of the mitzvah. But before that, you already know that Hashem exists. So the Rebbe says over here that the knowledge that a Yid knows this itself, that Hashem exists, before he understands how great the Eibishter is, that is much greater than knowing that Hashem is great. Which means this, that he knows Hashem exists, is much, much greater than knowing how great the Eibishter is. Why? Because this itself, that you know Hashem exists, this brings you, and this is the source that causes and brings a Yid to know how great the Eibishter is. This concept that a Jew knows how great Hashem is, this doesn't need to come on to anything else to make him exist. And that everything in the world needs to come up to Hashem. All of this is saying how great Hashem is according to a person's seichel. When a person knows how great the Eibishter is, when he's fulfilling the mitzvah of knowing how great Hashem is, all of this is knowing according, it's a limited understanding about the greatness of Hashem. It's a level of Hashem, the way it has to do with a person's seichel that he could understand. But because Hashem does not have any set form, chas v'shalom, to say the way he is, you can't, categorize Hashem in any type of categorizing. You can't limit Hashem, say this is Hashem and that's Hashem. Chas v'shalom. You can't categorize Hashem in those things, and even those understandings that they force you to say that Hashem exists. You cannot limit Hashem to such a level of understanding. You can't say that is the Eibishter. That's all what you understand according to Seichel. These are all lower levels and limited levels in knowing and understanding Hashem. Move on. B'pashtas shehu yizbarich shabaris hagdorim ein mugdir behem chas v'shalom. L'shuvas harashba yidua shehu yizbarich nimna nimnois. Shlafanav yizbarich ein shaykh chas v'shalom shum dover nimna. So even if according to someone's seichel, Hashem must exist, you have to say that Hashem exists. Who caused this? Who made this? Who created this concept that you have to say Hashem exists? This itself is, you have to say, according to someone that's even a rational person, you have to say Hashem exists. But all of this rationalism, who created this rationalism? God created this rationalism. So all of this, that Hashem exists, and Hashem has to exist, and a person knows according to Seichel that I must say Hashem is here, etc., etc. All of this is based according to your Seichel, according to understanding. And who created your seichel? And who made you be able to understand that Hashem exists in such a way? Hashem himself. So you can't say that when a person grasps Hashem according to his seichel, that is the essence of Hashem, that is the essence of God. No. This is all a limited, lower level in God, about God, which is only according to a person's understanding, only according to a person's seichel. Like the Rashba says, that Hashem is called Nimna HaNimnois. Nimna means something that's impossible. The God it's impossible to say that there's something impossible for the Eibishter to do. So there's absolutely Hirak Meish HaKadosh Baruch Hu Tzimtzem Es Atzmei K'V'Yoliyeh Sholem Gam B'Gidrei HaSeichel. This how great Hashem is and how Hashem exists, all of this is only a limited level of God that God made himself be understandable according to someone's seichel. That a person's seichel has to say that you must say that God exists. This is all what a person can grasp according to his seichel. That you must say that Hashem is here. That is only a limited, lower level in Hashem. But Hashem himself is obviously much greater than anything that a person could understand. How much more so that this is not whatever a person could understand with this seichel, how Hashem must exist. And Hashem exists. This is not Hashem, and this is not the essence of Hashem. This is first of Hashem, and for sure not the essence of Hashem. Hashem, the essence of God, does not have at all. You cannot categorize Hashem even to say that Hashem is so great and complete. There's no such a thing. Hashem is much greater than being great. And even in the highest, greatest forms of saying how awesome Hashem is, you cannot limit Hashem to that greatest, most awesome level. And this is what the Amunah in this, that Hashem exists, that comes before knowing how great and awesome Hashem is. The Amunah that a Yid just has in Hashem before he fulfills the mitzvah. The Amunah in Hashem that brings him to fulfill the mitzvah. The mitzvah of knowing that Hashem, how great Hashem is. So the cause is much greater than the effect. If it could cause such a thing, it's much greater than the effect. So this, that a Jew just believes that Hashem exists before he fulfills the mitzvah to know how awesome and how great Hashem is. This itself, that a Yid knows that he has this feeling that Hashem exists, and this brings him to fulfill the mitzvahs. This is much greater than the actual understanding of how great Hashem is. Because all of your understanding how great Hashem is, this is all in the limited lower levels of God that does not bring out, this is not the essence of Hashem. But the Amunah that a Jew believes in Hashem, that he feels that Hashem exists before he fulfills any mitzvah of knowing how awesome and great Hashem is, that is the essence of Hashem. Al Piza Yuvan Mashikos Varam Shamalocha Dalid, who shall know the Yemer, Vavay Memes, who Levad the Yemes, Vin Lacheremes Kamitosi, who shall Tere Meres, Ained Malvadi Hulu, Telachere Movin, Harin and Amitosi is Borich, he's Birkvar Mikadim, Halacha Gimel Al Pisechel. The Mekavin Jakalim Time Srichim Lay, who Baruch Wayne Sarichlahem, Lilach Mayhem, the Fuchach and Amitos, Kamitas Achadamham. Vim Kain Ma, Kavanosi, Shamasi, who Shadaviem and Hulu Shatere Meres. According to this, we can understand what the Rambam writes. And Hilchos is say that the Rambam, they need to come up to Hashem. They need Hashem in order for them to exist. But Hashem doesn't need them to exist. Any other creation, why isn't it real? Because it cannot exist on its own. It needs to come up to something else. But Hashem does not need to come up to anything, and Hashem exists on his own. That shows, therefore he says nothing is true like Hashem's truth. That's what the Rambam says in Allah. Right after that, the Rambam continues in Allah Daled, and he says, This is what the Navi says. Havaya likim emes. Hashem is truth. Hu levadei emes. Only God is true. Only He's truth. And there's no truth like His truth. And this is what the Torah says. There's nothing besides for Hashem. The Chayira, what is the point that the Rambam has to add and say, this is what the Torah is saying God's true. This is what the Nevi'im are saying, the prophets are saying that God is true. You just explained the greatness of God and why Hashem is true, because nothing needs to come up to Him. So and obviously we're talking about the way the Torah says it, etc., etc. So why does He need to emphasize and say, this is what it means Hashem is true? You just explained how God is true and we understand it. What's the point to emphasize? This is what the prophets are saying. Fabir b'zeh, v'keven shul yizbarich einei mugdar b'shum geder chas v'shalom, harei b'yocholtei lahamtzias hanimtzoyim b'efen kazeh shel acheri shenimtzou lo yehiyu tzrichim elav. The explanation in this is, because Hashem is not categorized in any form chas v'shalom, so Hashem has the ability, Hashem can do whatever, Hashem can make a world that doesn't need to come up to Him, that He doesn't need Him to be recreating it every single second. But the Alter Rebbe says in Shara Yuchad V'Amunah that just like a creator, a craftsman, that he makes a vessel, he doesn't need to be continuously making the vessel. But God, when He created the world, because this is a chidush, this is a revolution, this is a yesh ma'ayin, so obviously you have to say that God is constantly recreating this chidush, this revolution. And he brings over there the example from Kriyas Yamsuf. This that the water stood up, this wasn't a normal thing. So you can't say now that this is the new nature in the water, because it's just going to stay standing like this forever, and you can just take a walk and come back 50 years later, 1,000 years later, and you see the water standing. No, because this is something new, this is a miracle, this is a chiddush, so you need constantly the one that's making the chiddush, recreating it to make sure the chiddush continues to exist. So too, the creation of the world. Before, what would really be? Nothing. And God made a world, which is the Chiddush. So God needs to be constantly recreating the world. So this is a rational cheshbon that you're going to make. But because Hashem is not rational and He's above rationalism and He created rationalism, so He could have made a world that wouldn't need to come up to Him. The Avshal, please say, Chalmacharachas Lisis, Havas Kolanim Time, Eif, and Shu Talmud, Tzrich, May Love, come over Betanya. The Indian Brias, Yesh, May I, Machai, Shakoy, Yachapayil, Tzarich Lis, Talmud, Vadi for Lava, Yusay, Mayash, Had him a cave and Chuyas Baruchun, Dimnanim Noise, Hari Hochis, the Sechel Einum, Shumrayis, Klau, Beiza Eif, and Haisa Abria. Even though, according to Seichel, you have to say, like we just explained, that God exists and God's recreating the world and He needs to constantly being in the world. Like we just said before from Tanya, right? So but nevertheless, because Hashem, impossible is impossible. You can't say such a thing is impossible, to be without Hashem. But there's no such a thing of impossible. There's no such a thing of Seichel. Therefore, Hashem could have made the world in such a form that it won't need to come up to Him. And all these proofs from Alpi Seichel, why you have to say Hashem is recreating the world, Hashem could have made it in such a form that it wouldn't need to be in this way. Therefore, the Rambam needs to add and say, a person can come and say, well, all of these cheshbonis that you have to say that Hashem exists and Hashem is recreating the world, this is all Alpi Seichel, and Hashem's above Seichel. So who said that this is the way the world was created? And who says this is the way things are being, that God's constantly creating the world? Therefore, the Rambam needs to emphasize and say, this that he's saying that the God is here constantly creating the world is not a rational cheshbon. This is not something that you're making it according to Seichel, you're coming to say it in such a way, even though the Rambam says this, and the Alter Rebbe explains it, he says these cheshbonis. This that we believe that God is constantly recreating the world and the world needs to come up to Hashem, this is only because the Torah says so. This is because the prophets say so. And that's why we believe that the world is being recreated by Hashem every single second. Because the Torah said so and because the Nevi'im said so. Not because it makes sense, Al Pi Seichel. Because Al Pi Seichel, there's no such a thing that something needs to make sense or doesn't make sense. Hashem can make things that don't make sense also. V'shloheisif shemashakasav Rambam hu shanav yemer chulu. He lay rakray v'chachal mashakasav lifnei zeh ela shezegam halacha. For who the inin zeh gufa sheba'ifen pa'ulas hakadosh baruch hu. I efshar lachriach shum davar mitzad haseichel. Al kol prat uprat tzarich lahavirayim ha'Torah or prat the mitzvah sidiyas Hashem. Hainu sheba mitzvah sidiyas Hashem nichlales kam yidiyah shu yizbaruch l'maylam gidrei haseichel. So the Rebbe adds that this itself, that the Rambam emphasizes and says that the Torah says so, that the Navi says so. What is that? This itself, the Rambam is coming to bring out that in essence, the only reason why we believe that God is recreating the world every single second is only because the Torah says so, and only because the Navi says so, not because the Seichel is Machayiv so, which means that you need to know that God is above Seichel, Hashem is above rationalism, and the only reason why we rationalize something and we make a rational cheshbon is because the Torah says to be rational in that specific case. But Hashem on his own is completely unrational, which means that Rambam is coming to say, in other words, that you need to know two things. You need to know, or the Rambam is saying this point, that you need to know that God has this level that's above rationalism, that you cannot understand it. So there's a level of you understanding how great Hashem is according to Seichel. That is the mitzvah of Yidiyas Hashem. But in the mitzvah of knowing in Yidiyas Hashem, the mitzvah is not to know that Hashem exists, like we said before, because you know that already. Then that's much greater than the mitzvah of knowing Hashem. That brings you to fulfill the mitzvah of knowing how great Hashem is. But that's all the greatness according to Seichel. And you also need to know that in essence, Hashem is much greater than Seichel. We could say that this concept, this halacha, that a yid needs to know that Hashem is above Seichel, the Rambam says it really earlier, not only later on in halacha Dalid, but even earlier in halacha Beis. The Rambam continues, and after he says that a yid knows that Hashem exists and Hashem is the foundation of everything, the Rambam continues and says, and if it's going to come up onto your mind to think that Hashem doesn't exist. So what's that meant to say? The Rebbe is explaining like this. Halacha Aleph Kaisev v'hu mamtzi kol nimtza. Mamtzi loshen hoive. Shetit. Kam la'achri sheishis me'bereishis hu mamtzi kol nimtza ma'ayin liyesh. In Halacha Aleph, the Rambam says, the foundation of all foundations is to know that God is recreating all the creations. He writes that He is recreating in a happening form. He's constantly, even after the 6 days of creation, Hashem is constantly recreating the whole world from nothing. But actually, all of it, it's in Yizbarich, Shaisavas Tia Beifin Kazeh, Shabistalach, Koyach Apel, Aladei Davar, Acher Yochel Motzes. And the Acher Yochel Motzes. So, just this, we'll say this outside. The Rebbe is saying like this. And Halacha Aleph, the Rambam is saying that you need to know that God constantly exists and is recreating the world every single second from nothing. And if that power would leave the world, nothing could exist, like what Alter Rebbe says in Tanya. Then the Rambam continues and says, Yala ladas shahu eino motzui. So the simple meaning of the Rambam is coming to say, if you're going to think that He doesn't exist, but here the Rebbe is saying a much, much greater and deeper Geshmakevot explanation in this Rambam, that there needs to be a yid. There's the understanding of Hashem exists according to Seichel. That according to Seichel, understand that Hashem has to be constantly recreating the world. Then a yid needs to reach, and that's the mitzvah of knowing that Yidis Hashem. Then a yid needs to go up to a higher level, to reach a much higher madrega in your understanding and how great Hashem is. That there's such a possibility that Hashem could have made the world in a form that He doesn't need to be found in the creations to constantly recreating the world. Hashem could have made the world in such a form. Even though according to Seichel, you can't say such a thing. But Hashem is above Seichel. Hashem, you need to know that Hashem is above Seichel. That's what the Rambam is saying in other words. You need to know that Hashem is above Seichel. It's not only that you understand that Hashem exists according to Seichel, and that's what forces you to know that Hashem exists because it makes sense in a rational form. No, there needs to be you need to know that Hashem is above rationalism. So Hashem could have made the world in a form that the world doesn't need to come up to Him. But Poel Mamish, because the Torah says, and the Nevi'im say, that Hashem made the world in such a form that the world constantly needs the Eibishter, so we know that the Eibishter is constantly recreating the whole world every single second from nothing. Now, so according to what we said before until now, there is 3 levels in Dargis. Aleph, and the Rebbe is going in order. The first thing is Ha'amunah Shelifnei Hatzivui Yidia Kololif Shesh Alakam and Belili Konis L'Shum Pratim. The first level is belief, Amunah. This is not understanding Hashem, Al Pi Seichel, which Seichel is limited. Amunah is above Seichel, it's above limitations, above rationalism. So the first thing, before there's any mitzvah, before you accept any mitzvahs, you know that there's already a creator. So this, that you already know that there's a creator, that's number one. First thing is a Yid has his belief, Amunah, that Hashem exists. And this Amunah, that Hashem exists, this is connected, like the Rebbe said earlier, this is the deepest and highest level. You're connected, this is to the essence of Hashem, the Atzmus. You're not getting into detail. Base. The next level is Hayidiyah, Mitzad Atzivui, Shia Shamatzi Rishein, Vumamzi Kodim Tzavachulu, Hayidiyah B'Shleimusi Yizbarach Shalpi Seichel. The second level is you have a mitzvah to know that Hashem exists, to know how great Hashem is according to your Seichel. This that the Seichel forces you to know that Hashem exists. Yeah, you must say that Hashem exists. That's the second level. The third level is the highest level, is a higher level. Gimel Yidiyah Nailis Yoiser Shkabi Bechlal HaMitzvah Shehu Yizbarich Einei Mugdar Begeder HaSeichel. The third level is, which this is also part of the mitzvah of Yidiyas Hashem, that a Yid knows and understands that Hashem is not limited and does not have any type of, there's no way of categorizing Hashem al pi seichel. Hashem is totally above seichel. You need to understand with your seichel that Hashem, you need to know, there's a mitzvah that you should know that Hashem is above seichel. So in your understanding, in your seichel itself, you need to understand that you're created by Hashem, and you cannot understand your creator. HaKadosh Baruch Hu does not have any type of limit and any type of categorizing. You can't limit Hashem and grasp Hashem and say this is Hashem. And the lashon of Chakir, like it says in the Sefer B'chinas Seilam, Tachlis HaYidiyah. The highest level of understanding Hashem is that you understand with your seichel that you cannot understand the Eibishter. Elo sh'afal pi kein gam yidiyah zu hi shoyin v'yidiyah klolis ha'amunah sheyesh alakah sheyeshna ba'odom et lifnei kiyum ha'mitzvah. So, nevertheless, even though there's the amunah that a yid comes before any mitzvah, amunah that a yid believes Hashem exists, that's number one. This is amunah, this is belief which is totally above seichel. Then we're saying that there's an understanding al pi seichel. Then there's a third level that you understand on al pi seichel that Hashem is above seichel, which means the first level, which is also above seichel, there's no seichel involved. It's just amunah, it's not a yidiyah. It's above seichel. It's different than the above seichel that comes after. That's part of the mitzvah. Why? Ki yidiyah hanal yala ladat shweinei motzei yibo mitzad yidiyas v'seichel ha'adam. So what is this? What is different, the third level, than the first level? The first level is amunah, which there's no seichel at all involved. The third level is that there is seichel, and with your seichel, with your limited seichel, you understand that you cannot grasp Hashem. it's called Yidiyas HaShlila. You understand that you don't understand. Masha'inkin Amun Vayidiyah Klal Sheshalakar Yidiyazu Shabadam Hi Loi Mitzad Gidri Yidiyas Vasechal Adam Kam Loi Kama Yishahu Be'efin Shli Yidiyas HaShlila Ki Mitzad Zeh Shahu Yizbarech Nimsa Begili B'chol Makim. So the Amunah, the belief, the first level is a general belief that Hashem exists. You know that Hashem exists. It's a simple amunah that a little baby has, that Hashem exists. Like it says in footnote 17. The moir, the essence of light, the source of light, Hashem, the Atzmus, is here, He is revealed, and therefore even little babies know that Hashem exists. This is just a simple belief, Hashem is here. What is Hashem? I don't know. There's no seichel at all. And then, after I know that Hashem exists, see there's a mitzvah to know and understand how Hashem exists, that Hashem exists, how you have to say so al pi seichel, that's the second level. And after you understand how al pi seichel, how Hashem has to be here, there's another mitzvah, or it's part of the same mitzvah, but you need to have such an aliyah on your seichel that really Hashem is so great that all of your proofs that Hashem exists, and Hashem in essence doesn't need all of these proofs. And Hashem could have made Himself in such a form that all of these proofs don't even limit, and all of these proofs that Hashem exists cannot really prove. God is not limited in these proofs. This is all rational cheshbonis, that Hashem didn't need to make these rational cheshbonis. Hashem could have made the world in such a way without or not according to all of these rational cheshbonis. Okay, so we explained today, with Hashem's help, that there's 3 levels in knowing Hashem. So that's Hashem, we're going to continue and explain how these 3 dargas, how they play out in the words of the Rambam, the last halacha, and so too in the etzem concept of Yesa Mashiach, how there are these 3 levels. And may Moshiach come and we'll see everything B'nei Basra. Before we continue in learning it, we'll see it with Moshiach Tzidkeinu himself, and he'll teach us the rest of the Sikha.